Okay, so since I've recently already reviewed quite a bunch of truly wireless earphones, and at the end of the day they are all kind of doing the same, I think we can skip the intro and jump right into a review of the Anker Soundcore Liberty Lite, which cost about 50 euros, and today we are going to check out if they are worth just that. But before, we are going to check what's actually in the box, and obviously with the usual micro USB cable that is once again too short, this is something we can just skip and go to the more important stuff like the tips. We get 4 different sizes from XS, S, M to L, where I have to mention one difference compared to all the other ones. The XS ones are a little bit more straight, where the other ones are a little bit more concave. Doesn't really make a big difference though, because they all feel kind of similar, give you a good grip and comfort, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. And if you want actually a little bit more extra grip and maybe a better fit, you can also apply these wing tips. Pretty nice that you actually get that. I don't need them because I already had enough comfort and fit, but in case you want that, that's just that. Now about the case, I have to say I generally like it because it's, in terms of size, not all that bad. It's similar to, for example, as you can see here, the Blitzwolf FY2 or the AirDots, so not that different, but it's not the most compact one, especially if we would compare it to the Soundcore Liberty Air, and that one is just super nice and compact, but those are also a little bit more expensive. On the back we get, for example, as you can see, with a flap covered the micro USB port in. Yes, it's still micro USB, and actually about that flap I would just rip that off because I don't need the sweat proof and all that kind of things on the back of the case. Anyways, 600 milliamp hours allows to be stored in the charging case, which if we open it up already shows the battery charge. And one thing that I like a lot is that it doesn't just show the charge when you open up, but this also stays open due to the hinge, which is a nice thing, and it also stays closed due to magnets, because the issue that I, for example, have on the Blitzwolf FY2, this is loose. This doesn't really properly stick in either way, so definitely improvement here. Even though I have to say there's one thing about the case that is not that good, which would be those magnets. And I'm not quite sure if this is just an unlucky coincidence on mine, but if I put them in, it doesn't always properly connect, and sometimes when I wanted to use them the next time, they just didn't really charge. I've read up about that on Amazon. One person, for example, had that issue. He got his replaced and never had it again. So I might be just unlucky with my version here. Or maybe it's a general thing that's maybe just not that good in it. But because usually it looks that it fits quite good. But yeah, that's sort of about the case. So generally the case is still pretty nice. And now let's talk about the headphone or the earphones. And I have to say that these are generally quite big. Because if we compare this, for example, with the already not that small FY2, or maybe even with the Alpha Wise, where I said you look like Shrek if you have them inside, these are even bigger. I mean, that doesn't really have a negative impact at all on the comfort, but we'll get into that in just a second. The one thing that I wanted to still to be mentioned is that we have proper buttons on each of the earphones, which is one thing that I like, because generally with all the touch ones, I still have the issue that the delay until it actually reacts to your input just takes way longer. And then this just avoids accidents, and sometimes those with the touch input also don't really react that well, so I prefer proper buttons here. So now let's get into the comfort and check how good that one is. And I have to say that the comfort generally is very good. Now I once again have to mention that my right ear, for example, in this case once again works perfectly, and I could pretty much forget these in my ear, which is unfortunately, as pretty much all the time, not quite a thing on my left ear, but generally very secure. And if you want some extra secure fit, use the wingtips, but they are also very comfortable, so I like that. But as you can once again see, and for some reason it looks a little bit even more so extreme on the right one, they stick out quite a lot. So they are definitely not super subtle. I guess that's just something that we have to live with because they look very big. Yeah, that's just it. About one thing that is a benefit though is definitely the isolation, because even with the smaller tips that might not fit all that great for everyone, these have more isolation than anyone else, and they filter out so much sound out of the environment that if you want to talk with someone having these in your ear, it might be a little bit harder. So this could be either good or bad. If you want to hear something off the outside, maybe more, then it's maybe not that great. But in case you want better isolation, this is definitely what you will get. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the controls and such. First of all, let's get into those. If you have them inside and you press once, they turn on. If they don't usually already do this by their own, if you take them out of the case, so that's another thing. If you press once on either one, it's pause. If you hold for a little bit longer, it's to skip the track. Forward on the right side, backwards on the left side. If you press for really, really long, then they turn off, and if you make a double press, the assistant starts. And since these are proper buttons, there are no kind of unwanted clicks, which is good. But unfortunately, this also doesn't allow for volume control. It would be possible, like for example the Lenovo Air Show, but they decided not to do just that. And the reaction though, since it's a proper button, is a little bit quicker than compared to the ones that have usually touch. Now, one thing that I also wanted to mention, that sometimes if you put them in the case, they don't immediately turn off. So sometimes it takes a little bit, maybe also because of the context. I'm not quite so sure. And about, for example, what people always want to know, do they have some white noise or some background hiss? Once you put them on the first time and then have on but not playing music, then there is a little bit of some audible hiss, which usually goes away like after like 5 or 10 seconds when they kind of turn into standby mode. But during listening to music and between tracks, there was nothing that really concerned me, so all that was good. What I have to say though is, unfortunately, they don't support aptX or aptX HD, but fortunately enough, that is actually already good enough for me. They support AAC, which already is good enough in terms of delay, because there is no visible delay that would disturb me. I mean, I can watch movies and I can watch YouTube videos without any issues. AAC in terms of delay is already good enough for that, but for some people it might not be good enough, but I don't think that's actually the case. About the mono mode, I have to say this. For me, it works out totally fine, because it's like this. If you have both paired and have in ears, you can take the left one and put it into the box. It will turn off automatically and the sound still continues to play on the right one, which doesn't work the other way, because if you put the right one in, then the left one turns off and it doesn't even turn on anymore. So on some headphones, there is the option to pair them separately, but that's not an option even if this would work. Or here, which maybe something is that I missed, but usually to unpair them every time and pair them again into single pairs is not a thing. So if you want to use mono mode, it works on the right side, which is absolutely fine for me, because if I use mono mode, then it is on the right side. So I guess I'm on the lucky side here. Lucky, no, not quite so much about the battery life. In my case, that was pretty disappointing, because they claim about 3.5 hours and what I got was 2.5, and I don't get why, because I got something from about 2 hours and 20 to just about 2 hours and 30 in mono mode, because when it doesn't have to kind of sync with each other, then I was able to get like 2 hours and 50, which is less, and I don't get why, because I did some extra 2 and 3 runs to confirm that battery life, and I was always at pretty much constantly 2.5 hours, which is just less than the competition, because all those usually give you at least 3 hours, if not 3.5 hours. So if I would get those 3 solid hours or 3.5, my opinion about these headphones would be way better than it already is. And I've also checked Amazon here, and most people actually seem to get that. I didn't use full maximum volume, so it could be even worse if you use that. But about the maximum volume, I have to say, these actually, even for me, have reserves in terms of volume. So they can play very loud. I had like 1 or 2 clicks reserves, and that means everyone else should have that as well. So that's just about that. So let's talk about the sound now, starting off with the soundstage and the imaging. About the soundstage, for its price, compared to that, it is closed back in-ear. With Bluetooth, I think the sound is actually a little bit wider than on some of the cheaper ones. The imaging is, I would say, okay, because especially, for example, vocals are a little bit wider. But what I've also noticed is that they don't fully sound like centered in front of you. They are sounding like they are in front of you, but not really all that pinpoint precision as it should maybe be. But in that price, I don't think you can expect that. But what about the sound signature? Here is the big thing that I like so much about these. This is what I would say in a budget segment, but even in a pretty typical mainstream segment, should be the reference in terms of signature, because this is a pretty typical V-shape. So boosted bass and boosted highs, maybe even a little more boosted bass than highs, but those highs make up for something else that I will get into in just a second. But these are so well balanced for mainstream, because they give you the bass that everyone wants, but still with enough of clarity with some pushed highs. And the mids actually are totally fine, but I'll get into that in a second. So this is how it should be. This is a nice full warm sound, and just way better than all the other mainstream headphones that have a lot of bass and then no highs at all. So you get that. But with the highs that are a little bit on the more harsher side, it might be not maybe all that long-term friendly for some people, being a little bit more fatiguing. But let's take a look at the individual categories, like for example the bass itself. Here I have to say it isn't actually stronger pushed bass, but it is a very smooth bass, which is something that I like. So it is a little bit of a thick bass, but once again, being soft and being actually quite pleasant, it really integrates well, being definitely more on the dominant side after all, with quite a good punch. I mean, quite a good push, but not quite that of a strong, tight punch. In terms of mids, I would say nice and present, quite full and warm. And ever so slightly on the vocal side, on the higher end, a little bit thin on certain female vocals. About the highs, now this is where it gets interesting, or maybe not quite so much, because they can be a little bit sibilant, they can be a little bit shrill, but for me the most important thing is that they are never muffled. They have this good, nice clarity, and this might not be something that everyone wants, especially when it comes to the sibilance and clarity. I've heard that people said that these are too shrill, but I rather have a little bit more something harsh and shrill than being just muffled and music then sounding just dull. So I actually prefer it, which actually leads me to the next point, which is for which kind of music genre they work well. And here, for example, to be mentioned is metal and rock, because especially if you have older music that isn't all that well mastered, which usually is a little bit more muffled and dull in the first place, due to this a little bit shriller highs or pushed highs, this kind of makes up for it, and it's actually really pleasant to hear. Pop works out totally fine. This is what it usually works out best. Then bass works really, really good due to the strong sub bass and generally warm and full bass that can be quite dominant. So here, really good job, but also balanced because it's a full warm sound and also still quite brilliant on the other end with classic music that works out as well. So nice. Now, what about the competition? Once again, I have to mention the Blitzwolf FY2 that cost only half the price of the Soundcore. I would say generally they are a little bit more pleasant for some people because they don't have the shrill highs and they're after all cheaper. So in terms of value, they are still better. But if I have to say, due to having this little bit more brilliance in the highs, a little bit more clarity, I still prefer them. And even though they are twice as much in terms of price and actually give you less battery life, I still kind of prefer it if it doesn't really come down to that battery life, because I have enough spare so I can switch them out in between. But if you want one that lives for a little bit longer, the FY2 might be better, but if it just comes down to quality of the sound, I prefer the Soundcore a little bit more. Alpha-wise, I've reviewed those, cost also about $30. I have to say are just not balanced enough. Way too much bass and no highs. As much as I would like to like them, I can't. About the AirDots from Xiaomi, similar price, kind of similar sound signature, but once again the clarity is missing a little bit out on these, so these sound a little bit fresher and I generally like them a little bit more. Also no touch controls and so on, so these might be better, especially if you find them cheaper for some people, maybe for the general consensus of people, but I once again prefer the Soundcore. Now about the AirDots Pro, that's a different kind of thing, but those also cost like $80-$90. These are better in pretty much every aspect, but they are also more expensive, not quite comparable. And I actually will make a big comparison at one point, but these are not directly comparable. Just as much as, for example, also the Liberty Air, which cost 100 euros compared to the 50 euros of the Soundcore Liberty Lite. But I have to also say this, these actually sound generally pretty similar to these, but just cost half the price. Obviously, these have definitely some upsides over the Liberty Lite, but that's something later on for the comparison. Now, once again, let's sum up the pros and cons. Generally, pretty nice comfort and fit. If you even more so, fitting with the ear wings. We have good controls, we have a good mainstream sound, and we at least have AAC, which makes a difference compared to SBC, just because there is the issue with delay. But on the downsides, we have micro USB, not a huge issue for me. The one thing that I didn't like so much personally is that they are that big, which makes them more obvious, but also on the left ear, they just weren't all that comfortable like some other ones. But on the right ear, absolutely perfect, so all is good here. And then again, these are not for everyone due to the more shrill highs. So in case you want something a little bit more lively, these are what you want. But if you just care about the good balance but a smooth sound with a long-term usability, then there are maybe more pleasant alternatives out there. And my biggest issue is the battery life of 2.5 hours. If these would deliver at least half a solid hour more in stereo mode, or even an hour, I would totally praise them and I would tell you, you have to buy them. Which is kind of what I'm still gonna do, just because I like the overall aspect for $50 still. Because the sound is noticeably better compared to the ones at around $30. After all, it is noticeable. They just deliver more details, more precise sound and so on. The case works out good. We have the wings, we have the comfort, the controls, that all is there. But the battery life. If you can get past that, absolutely a recommendation. But once again, big comparison with alternatives will come soon. But for right now, that would be it. I hope you liked the review. Give it a thumbs up and we'll see us next time. Until next time, bye.